Billionaire kid sees a homeless man eating his leftovers. What happens next changes his perspective forever. The young boy sat in the back seat of a black Rolls-Royce, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing out the tinted window. Liam was no ordinary kid. He was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. His father owned one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and Liam had never known a life without luxury. Today was no different. He had just left an upscale restaurant where he barely touched his meal. The plate had been piled high with gourmet steak, truffle mashed potatoes, and roasted vegetables. But he had only taken a few bites before pushing it away. He had been too busy chatting with his friends, bragging about the new private jet his father had just bought. His driver pulled the car to a stop at a red light. Liam sighed impatiently, tapping his foot. That's when he glanced out the window and saw him, a homeless man sitting against the sidewalk, hunched over, wearing ragged clothes and clutching a tattered bag. Liam wouldn't have thought twice about it if not for the moment that followed. The man was holding a small, crumpled takeout box, the same one from the restaurant Liam had just been in. His restaurant. His eyes narrowed. Could it be? His driver noticed his gaze. "Sir." Liam didn't answer. He stared as the man carefully opened the box, revealing Liam's half-eaten steak and potatoes. He was eating his leftovers. His stomach twisted. It wasn't disgust exactly. It was something else. Something unfamiliar. The man took slow, careful bites, savoring every morsel as if it were the best meal he had ever had. His fingers shook as he brought each piece to his mouth. Liam's mind raced. How had his food ended up in the hands of a homeless man? Had one of the restaurant's staff given it away? Had someone picked it out of the trash? He rolled down the window, ignoring his driver's disapproving glance. "Hey," he called out. The homeless man froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes darted up, tired, wary. "Yes." "Where did you get that?" Liam asked, nodding at the box. The man hesitated, then lowered his fork. "From a kind waiter," he said. "They were going to throw it away, but he gave it to me instead." Liam felt a strange pressure in his chest. He had pushed that meal away without a second thought, treating it as if it were worthless. But now, here was this man, treating it like a treasure. The light turned green. The driver glanced at him. "Shall I drive on, sir?" Liam hesitated. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to forget this moment. But something inside him held him back. "No. Pull over." The driver frowned, but obeyed. Liam stepped out, feeling the crisp evening air against his skin. He approached the man, unsure of what to say. "You really like that, huh?" The man looked up at him, studying him carefully. Then he nodded. "Yes. It's the best meal I've had in weeks." Liam's throat tightened. Do you want more?" The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. He had never offered anything to a stranger before. The man's eyes lit up with cautious hope. "You do that?" Liam nodded, suddenly determined. Without another word, he turned back to the car. "Wait here." He slid into the back seat and grabbed his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of bills. He had never really thought about money. It had always been there. But now, he held the cash a little tighter. Stepping back onto the sidewalk, he handed the money to the man. "Here, get yourself something better than my leftovers." The man looked at the money, stunned. His hands trembled as he took it. "This is too much," he whispered. Liam shrugged. "It's nothing." The man looked up sharply, his gaze piercing. "Nothing to you, maybe. But to me, this is hope." Liam didn't know how to respond. He had always seen money as just a tool, something his father used to build their empire. But to this man, it was life-changing. The man hesitated, then smiled. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Liam nodded, turning back toward his car. But as he reached for the door handle, the man spoke again. "You know, when I was your age, I had everything too." Liam froze. Slowly he turned. "What?" The man nodded. "I wasn't always like this." Liam felt his pulse quicken. He had assumed this man had always been poor, but now he wasn't so sure. The man patted the ground beside him. "Sit. I'll tell you a story." Liam hesitated. A billionaire's son, sitting on a dirty sidewalk? His father would be furious if he saw this. But something about the man's eyes, the quiet wisdom in them, made him curious. He sat down. The man took a deep breath. Once, I had a company. A big one. I was just like your dad. Big house, fancy cars, all of it. Liam's eyes widened. What happened? The man smiled sadly. Greed. Arrogance. I thought money made me invincible. I ignored people, stepped on them to climb higher. I didn't see how fragile it all was. He looked down at the takeout box. One day it all disappeared. My business collapsed. My so-called friends vanished. And just like that, I was here. Liam swallowed hard. He had never imagined losing everything. His father always said money was power. But what if power wasn't enough? The man studied him. You have more than just money, kid. You have a choice. You can be different. Liam stared at him, the words sinking deep. For the first time in his life, he wondered, was wealth really the most important thing? He looked down at his untouched designer shoes, then back at the man. Then he made a decision, one that would change everything. Liam sat there, the cold pavement seeping through his expensive trousers, yet he barely noticed. The man's words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling, like a storm brewing on the horizon. He had always believed that wealth was the ultimate shield, an unbreakable fortress that protected those inside from the struggles of the outside world. But this man, this stranger who once stood where his father stood now, had fallen hard. And now he was eating food that Liam himself had discarded without a second thought. The city bustled around them. Cars sped by, their tires hissing against the asphalt. A woman hurried past, clutching her purse tightly as she gave them a wary glance. Liam had never been in a situation like this before, sitting on the sidewalk, talking to someone who had lost everything. It felt surreal, as if he had stepped into another world, one that existed just beyond the tinted glass of his luxury cars, but had never truly been real to him until now. How did it happen? Liam finally asked, his voice quieter than before. The man exhaled, shaking his head. It wasn't one big thing. That's the mistake people make. They think disaster happens all at once, like a lightning strike. But no, it's little cracks forming, so small at first that you don't notice. Then one day, you step forward, and the ground crumbles beneath you. Liam swallowed, his fingers tightening on the edge of his seat. What kind of cracks? The man looked up at the sky, as if searching for an answer. I stopped listening. I thought I knew everything. When people warned me, I brushed them off. My employees? Just numbers on a spreadsheet. My family? A distraction from the empire I was building. Friends? Only useful as long as they benefited me. He sighed, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them. I was making money, sure, but I was losing something else. Something I didn't even know I needed. Liam frowned. What do you mean? The man gave him a long, searching look. Tell me something, kid. When is the last time you had a real conversation with someone without checking your phone? Liam opened his mouth, then hesitated. He wanted to say, just earlier today. But then he thought back. At lunch, he had barely glanced up from his screen, more interested in the latest updates from his friends than in talking to his father. At home, he was either gaming, scrolling, or distracted by something else. Even now, he could feel the weight of his phone in his pocket, buzzing with notifications that suddenly felt unimportant. The man nodded, as if reading his thoughts. That's how it starts. You get so wrapped up in what's next, what's bigger, what's better, that you forget what's in front of you. And before you know it, you're surrounded by people, but you're completely alone. Liam felt a chill run down his spine. He had never thought of it that way before. His father was always busy, always talking about investments, meetings, profits. When was the last time they had sat down just to talk? When was the last time Liam had felt connected to something real? The man sighed. My wife left first. Said I wasn't the same man she married. I barely noticed. I thought love was just another thing money could buy. Then my best friend, the only one who had been there since the beginning, walked away. Said I had turned into someone he didn't recognize. I laughed. Who needs friends when you have power? Then the market crashed. My company took a hit, And suddenly, all those people who called me a genius weren't picking up my calls anymore. Investors pulled out. Lawsuits came next. One by one, my safety nets disappeared. Liam couldn't look away. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, one that felt too eerily possible for comfort. I lost everything in a year, the man continued. The house, the cars, the respect. And when it was all gone, I realized I had no one left to turn to, because I had pushed them all away. He gestured around him. And so here I am, eating a meal from a kid who has no idea how fast it can all disappear. Liam's stomach twisted. He wanted to argue, wanted to say that his family was different, that his father was too smart to ever let something like that happen. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. His father worked late, traveled constantly, rarely smiled anymore. He was always talking about growth, about expansion. But was he really any different from this man before he lost everything? Liam took a breath. What would you do differently? The man chuckled, but it was a sad sound. Everything. I would have valued people more. I would have treated relationships like investments instead of transactions. I would have spent time with my kid instead of chasing another deal. His expression darkened. I would have listened before it was too late. Liam felt something shift inside him, something uncomfortable but necessary. He thought about his father, the way he barely paid attention when Liam talked about his day. He thought about his own friends, how most of their conversations revolved around money, status, and competition. He thought about himself, how he had taken everything for granted, believing it would always be there. For the first time in his life, he wasn't so sure. He reached into his pocket again, but this time, he wasn't looking for money. He pulled out his phone, staring at the home screen filled with endless distractions. Then, slowly, he powered it down. The man watched him, raising an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Liam shrugged. "Listening." A slow smile spread across the man's face. He nodded approvingly. For the next hour, Liam sat there, listening as the man shared more stories of his rise, his fall, the regrets that kept him up at night. And for the first time, Liam truly understood what it meant to be wealthy. Not in money, but in time, in relationships, in the moments that people often let slip away. Eventually, Liam's driver stepped out of the car, looking uneasy. "Sir, your father is calling." Liam took the phone, staring at the screen. He hesitated. Then, for the first time in years, he made a choice that wasn't about money, wasn't about status. He declined the call. Then, he turned to the man beside him. "Come on," he said, standing up and extending a hand. "Let's get you a real meal." The man looked at him, surprised. Then, slowly, he took Liam's hand. And just like that, a billionaire's son and a man who had lost everything walked side by side into the night, not as strangers, but as two people who understood something most never did. Money could be lost. But the moments you chose to cherish? Those were priceless. Liam led the man toward a small diner just down the street. It wasn't one of the upscale restaurants he was used to, not the kind where waiters in crisp uniforms pulled out chairs and placed linen napkins on your lap before you even sat down. No, this was different. It was warm, simple, real. The neon sign above the door flickered slightly, casting a soft red glow over the entrance. Inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the buttery aroma of pancakes, sizzling on the griddle. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time, where people came not for status, but for comfort. The old man hesitated at the entrance, glancing down at his worn-out shoes and ragged clothes, as if he didn't quite belong. Liam noticed. Without thinking, he stepped forward and pulled the door open wider, giving a slight nod. "Come on," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Inside, a waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile greeted them, barely glancing at the old man's appearance before leading them to a booth in the corner. Liam slid in first, and the man followed, shifting uneasily as if expecting someone to tell him he wasn't allowed to be there. But no one did. Instead, the waitress placed 2 menus in front of them and filled their glasses with water. "Take your time, Han," she said before walking away. Liam glanced across the table. The man wasn't even looking at the menu. Instead, he was staring at the glass of water in front of him, fingers brushing the condensation on the outside as if trying to convince himself it was real. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he lifted it and took a sip. Liam didn't say anything, but something about that small action hit him in a way he couldn't quite explain. "I haven't had a meal in a place like this in a long time," the man admitted after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not since," he stopped, shaking his head. "Never mind." Liam hesitated before setting his own menu down. "Not since what?" The man exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Not since my son was your age." Something in Liam's chest tightened. He hadn't expected that. "You have a son?" "Had." The word was heavy, final. The man didn't elaborate, and Liam didn't push, though part of him wanted to. Instead, he waited. And eventually, the man spoke again. "He was like you in a lot of ways. Smart, curious, always asking questions." A small, wistful smile flickered across his face. "But I was too busy to answer them. Too focused on building my empire, thinking I was doing it all for him. I told myself I was securing his future, making sure he'd never struggle the way I did. But what I didn't realize was that I was giving him everything, except the one thing he actually wanted." Liam swallowed. "Which was?" "Me." The man let out a bitter laugh. "By the time I realized it, he had already stopped asking for my time, stopped looking up to me, stopped waiting for me to care." His fingers tightened around the glass. "And then, one day he was gone. Moved away, changed his name. Wanted nothing to do with me." He shook his head. "Can't say I blame him." Liam felt a chill run through him. He thought about his own father. Always busy, always preoccupied. How many times had Liam sat at the dinner table, talking to someone who wasn't really there? How many times had his words gone unheard, lost in the noise of stock reports and business calls? He had told himself it didn't matter, that it was just the way things were. But now, sitting across from this man, he wasn't so sure. The waitress returned, pen poised over her notepad. Liam ordered a simple meal, something warm and filling. When she turned to the old man, he hesitated, glancing at Liam as if unsure whether he should really be doing this. Liam just nodded. "Whatever you want," he said. For the first time, the man didn't argue. He ordered slowly, as if each word was a test to see if the universe would let him have this moment. When the waitress walked away, he exhaled, leaning back against the booth. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Liam replied. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. The diner buzzed with quiet conversation, the clatter of dishes, the hum of an old jukebox playing a song Liam didn't recognize. And yet, for all the noise, the only thing he could really hear was the pounding of his own thoughts. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Liam asked suddenly. The man looked at him. "Every day." Liam thought about that. About the things he took for granted. About the choices he still had time to change. Their food arrived, and for a while, neither of them spoke. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it was the first real meal he'd had in years. Liam watched him, something shifting inside him, something he couldn't quite put into words. When they finished, Liam paid the bill without hesitation. The man stared at the receipt, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Liam replied. They stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around them. The streets were quieter now, the city's usual chaos dimmed under the glow of streetlights. Liam stuffed his hands into his pockets, glancing at the man beside him. "What will you do now?" he asked. The man exhaled, looking up at the sky as if searching for an answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "But maybe tonight was a start." Liam nodded, then hesitated before pulling something from his pocket. A card. Not just any card. His father's business card. He had never thought much about it before, just another piece of his father's empire. But now it felt like something more. "Call him," Liam said, handing it over. "He's not great at listening, but he helps people. Maybe he can help you." The man took the card, studying it as if it held the key to something long lost. Then he looked at Liam. "You're different from the others," he said quietly. Liam let out a small, almost sad smile. "Maybe not yet," he admitted. But I want to be. The man nodded, slipping the card into his pocket. Thank you, he said, and for the first time, Liam could hear the weight behind those words. As they parted ways, Liam felt something shift inside him. He didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let his life become another cautionary tale. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change the ending.